Let's talk about how to create a powerful marketing message for your business or for your product. Now, this is step number 2 in my marketing funnel series. And this step is critical because a lot of marketing related issues ultimately come down to a simple assumption. And that is that people already understand what you do or what you sell and how it can benefit them. And this is something that I see in all kinds of different businesses where people that work inside of the business are so intimately familiar with their own products or their own services that they forget what it's like to be a customer hearing about the business or hearing about the brand for the very first time. And as a result, they often communicate about their business in a way that fails to resonate with potential customers. For example, rather than talking about the problem they solve or the need that they address, they often end up talking about things like the industry that they are in or the category in which their product or service exists, assuming that customers will then connect the dots and understand the value that they provide, which unfortunately isn't always the case because customers don't tend to think about things in terms of industries or categories. They tend to think about things in terms of problems or needs that they have. So the entire focus of this video is on putting together a simple marketing message that will allow you to cut through the noise, one that makes it easy for customers to immediately understand exactly what you do in plain language that resonates with them. Now, there are many different ways to put together a compelling marketing message, but one of my favorite formulas, and the one that we're going to cover in this video, comes from Marketing Made Simple by Donald Miller. And this is a 3-part process. We start with the problem, in which we describe the problem or the need that the customer is experiencing when they're looking for your product or service as a solution. Then number 2 is the solution. This is where we mention your product or service by name and talk about how it addresses the problem. And finally, number 3 is the result. And this is where we talk about the outcome or the benefit or result that the customer will experience by using your product or service. Now, we'll go through each of these 3 components in more detail here in a minute, but before we do that, let me quickly give you 2 examples from Marketing Made Simple of how these kinds of marketing messages come together, just so you can get a rough sense of what it is that we're trying to achieve here. Now, the first example is of a dental office for kids, and it goes like this. Most parents get stressed when they think about taking their children to the dentist. At Kids Teeth, our fun and welcoming office puts kids at ease so they aren't afraid and their parents actually enjoy their dentist visit. Here's another one, and this is for a bike store in Nashville. With 110 people moving to Nashville every day, people are wasting more and more time sitting in traffic. With a Circuit e-bike fitted just for you, you'll get hours back in your day and get to work faster. Notice how both examples include a clear problem, a solution, and a result. And it's also worth noting that neither of the examples attempt to cover absolutely everything that the business does. The idea here isn't to list everything that you can do for customers. It's to simply capture the essence of how you create value. The more that you try to include in your one-liner, the less likely it is to resonate. And just to drive this point home, I want to tell you a brief story that involves the late Steve Jobs meeting with Lee Clow of Chiat Day, the advertising agency behind the famous 1984 Super Bowl ad. Now, in this meeting, Steve was really pushing the idea of featuring all of the different benefits of the new iMac. He wanted to talk about the specific features that customers might benefit from and list them all in detail. And Lee Clow was trying to push back on this idea and make it clear that if you try to talk about too much, customers simply won't remember much from your advertising campaign at all. So what he did to illustrate this point is he grabbed a pad of paper, he tore out 5 sheets, and he took each sheet and wrapped it up into a paper ball. And then he took all 5 of the balls and said, "Steve, catch." And he threw all 5 at once. And of course, Steve caught none of them. So then he grabs one more sheet from the pad, he balls it up and says, "Steve, catch." And he throws just the one paper ball. And of course, Steve catches it. So the moral of the story here is that when it comes to crafting a marketing message, less is more. It's very important that we keep things simple to increase the likelihood that people will understand what we are saying and that it will resonate with them. And when the time comes when they have the problem or need that we're talking about, it's far more likely that they will recall our message, or at least the essence of it. So with that in mind, let's now explore the 3 components in greater detail. First is the problem. By starting with a clearly defined problem, we create a sense of curiosity on the part of the listener. And that's because as human beings, we're naturally curious around solutions to problems, especially problems that we happen to be currently experiencing. So whether they are currently having this problem, or they may have it in the future, or perhaps it's something they've experienced in the past, once they hear the problem being introduced, they start to wonder what your particular solution will be to that problem. They're curious what else you have to say. So in effect, by starting with the problem, we're using it as a hook to draw in their curiosity. Now, it's important that you think about this very carefully and that you don't just settle on the very first problem that comes to mind, because of course, odds are you solve many different problems for your customers. So the idea here is to identify the one overarching problem that customers tend to experience when they start to seek out your product or your service. So you're looking for the most common problem. And when it comes to identifying this problem, some of the examples from earlier might provide some inspiration, but ultimately you're going to want to list out a variety of options, test them with customers, maybe mention them to friends and family, and try to identify one core problem that best represents the issue that your customer is facing when they seek out your product or service. Next up is the solution. The idea here is to state the name of your product or service and then briefly describe how it solves the previously mentioned problem. And the goal here really is to create a mental connection between the problem that they might be experiencing and your specific solution. That way, whenever they or someone they know is experiencing the problem, they're reminded that your product exists and then it might be able to help them solve that problem. So whether, again, they are experiencing the problem or someone they know is experiencing it, they're reminded that your product exists and they'll consider buying it, or in the case of somebody else needing it, they might make a recommendation. Lastly, we have the result. The goal here is to completely resolve the tension that was introduced by first stating the problem and to clarify exactly how their life will be made better as a result of using your product or service. Let me give you a quick example of how this might work for my YouTube channel. When it comes to the problem, I might start by saying, you know how great products sometimes fail to attract customers? So here I'm defining the problem that a business might be facing, the inability to attract customers despite having a great product. Then when it comes to the solution, I'm going to mention my solution by name, which happens to be my name. And so I might say, Rick Kettner explains how to use proven marketing strategies to generate sales. So again, I've mentioned my name and I've talked about how I can actually help solve their problem by introducing proven marketing strategies. And then when it comes to the result, I might conclude by saying, so the business can thrive and have a positive impact in the world. And so this, of course, is how their life will be made better as a result of using my solution. Their business will thrive and they'll have a chance to have a more positive impact. Now, once you have all three individual components ready, it's time to stitch them together into one cohesive marketing message. Now, typically this involves making a few minor edits and revisions, maybe swapping out a word or two, just to make the overall structure flow a little bit more smoothly. And it's also worth noting that oftentimes the second and third components can be covered in a single sentence. So you might end up with something like this. You know how great products sometimes fail to attract customers? Rick Kettner explains how to use proven marketing strategies to generate more sales so the business can thrive and have a positive impact. Now, a clear and concise marketing message like this helps you achieve three independent goals. First and foremost, as we've talked about throughout this video, it makes it much easier for people to understand exactly what you do and how it can benefit them. Number two, it makes it more likely that people will recommend your product or service to other people because, again, if they recognize the problem that you solve and they link that with the idea of your specific solution, well, when that problem comes up, whether it's a friend or a family member that's experiencing it, they're more likely to remember your solution and to recommend it. And finally, number three, and this is something we haven't yet talked about, if you have a team that's helping create your product or service or helping deliver it to customers, well, it's more likely that that team is going to have greater alignment when you have a message like this. Because rather than just working haphazardly to create value for customers, when they understand the core problem that you're trying to solve, they're much more likely to focus their energy on improving the way that they solve that specific problem. So it creates greater clarity and greater alignment. So with all of that in mind, now is the time to create your marketing message. And this is your assignment here for video number 2 in the marketing funnel series. And the first place to begin is with identifying the core problem that your product or service addresses. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. First and foremost, you can dive into the origin story of the product. So whether you created it or somebody else created it, you can seek to understand why it was created in the first place. What inspired it? What was the problem that it was intended intending to solve. Another great option is to simply talk with existing customers and understand what problem they were facing that caused them to seek out your product or your service. And what you want to do here, because oftentimes you'll get different answers from different people, is to identify the commonalities. What do people have in common in terms of their motivation for buying your product and service? You want to write down all of the different ideas that come up, and you want to test them with customers to find out which option resonates most. Now, this is a process that can evolve over time, so nothing is final here, but you want to identify one core problem that seems to best resonate with people in terms of describing the reason they ultimately buy your product or service. Next up is the solution. And again, the idea here is to mention your specific product or service by name and then to describe how it goes about solving the problem. And typically this is easier once you've identified the problem. But again, you're going to want to find the best words to articulate how you go about solving the problem without getting stuck in the weeds and going into too much detail or covering too many different things. You want to find one cohesive statement that describes how it is that your product or service helps to solve the problem. Lastly, you want to think about how their life is made better by using your product or service. And again, this is one of those things where there may be many different possible answers, but your goal here is to identify the overarching benefit that customers receive by using your product. Do they have greater freedom? Do they live a simpler life? What other opportunities are unlocked by using your solution? You need to think very carefully about this, and again, try to come up with a single statement that best explains how their life is improved or what new opportunity they have as a result of using your product or service. And finally, once you have all three components, it's time to stitch them together into a single marketing message. And just keep in mind, nothing here is final. There's always the opportunity to make further refinements. It's very important that you test this out in the real world, try it with customers. Feel free to make some changes and revisions as needed. Once you're really comfortable with it, this is something that you can use in face-to-face conversations, marketing videos, simple advertisements, social media bios, email signatures, or even just in response to somebody asking you, what do you do? Anyway, that's it for this video. In the next step, we're going to talk about how to build a great marketing website. So click the like button and then continue on to the next video in this series. You can find a link to that right here in the video player, as well as down below in the video description text.